Drum rolls. With this painting and this artist, we get ready to leave this unit and to enter the world of modernism. This painting is not a required work by Manet. I will get to Olympia in a few minutes. But Luncheon on the Grass is too important to art history and too much of a precursor to our required work for me to skip over it entirely. Manet entered 3 works in the Salon of 1863. The Salon judges rejected all 3, and that's not really a surprise. The judges rejected 2/3 of the paintings submitted that year, including paintings by Courbet, Whistler, and Pissarro. The rejected artists, and at least some of the French public, however, raised such a howl that the leader of France, Napoleon III, took the unusual step of opening a Salon de Refusés, or a Salon of the Rejected. So I can't resist a digression. This is the Whistler painting that the Salon judges rejected. Whistler was a leading American realist painter, and this became one of his most famous works, and a favorite of mine. This painting, on the other hand, was the top hit of the Salon of 1863. There's a smaller version hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So, looking at this painting, what do you think the Salon judges expected from nudes? They expected soft, rounded bodies with careful modeling. They expected averted eyes. And they expected allegory. Nude goddesses, maybe to stretch semi-nude, misbehaving Roman females, but modern-day nudes? Sitting around the park with fully clothed gentlemen? No. This neoclassical painting is not a required work, but it did show up once on an AP exam, and it's very interesting from a sociological, if not from an artistic point of view. The Queen of England, that was actually the wife of George III, had dispatched a German painter to Florence to paint the Uffizi Gallery, a precursor to the very famous Uffizi Art Museum in Florence. Note the aristocratic men gathered to admire the art, most notably the painting at the bottom center. I trust you recognize Titian's Venus of Urbino. In this gallery, women are hanging on the wall as objects of observation and desire, subjects of painting, but women do not feature as painters or as connoisseurs of art. Feminist art critics often refer to this phenomenon as the male gaze, and we'll talk more about it in our last unit when we talk about feminist art. It's hard to blame Manet for refusing to imitate the 19th century equivalent of a penthouse centerfold, but he was heavily influenced by earlier renditions of nudes, including Titian's. Here we see nudes cavorting with men in modern dress. This was modern for 1510, but they're nymphs, so it's okay, right? And they sure don't look us in the eye. The woman who served as Manet's model for the nude with the forthright stare was also his model for Olympia. So let's learn a little bit more about her. And this brings us to another famous homage to Titian and our required work. In this work, Manet is almost certainly representing Victorine as the mistress of a wealthy French bourgeois gentleman, and she doesn't look especially ashamed about it either. But what do you think? What is the expression on her face? At the time, critics thought her gaze was disturbingly forthright and defiant. What do you think? I think she probably is forthright and defiant, but it also seems to me that she is sad and maybe trapped. What's with that ribbon tied around her throat? Seems to me almost like a metaphorical guillotining. Manet almost certainly chose the title of the work to be deliberately provocative. French courtesans often took classical stage names, such as Venus or Olympia. But Olympia was also the name of an especially famous courtesan from history, Olympia Medalcini, the sister-in-law, probably the mistress of Pope Innocent X back in the 1640s. She was a woman so powerful that she was nicknamed the female pope. Now, historians argue over whether that Olympia was in fact the Pope's mistress. But the French viewing audience would have known the story. So what we're seeing may be still another artistic attack on the church. Remember Courbet's burial scene? The Black Maid likewise scandalized the public. Unlike Titian's maidservant, which we see on the right, she features prominently, although her face blends into the darkness. And why is she here? Some critics think that Olympia's Black Maid was included to provide a deliberate foil to Olympia's stark whiteness. maybe even a shout out to the stark black-white contrasts of that new medium, photography. But other critics observed that the racial theory so popular at the time, a perversion of Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest that said that some races were less fit than others, associated people of color with bestiality, sexuality, and primitivism. And here's an interesting observation from an art blog. The black servant's presence also underscores the fact that the courtesan, unlike the streetwalker or common wench, exercises control and dominance, and it may even insinuate that those who yield to her charms are as subordinated as the black servant girl. Monet's painterly style also attracted criticism. Here's a quote from Princeton University art history professor Anne Macaulay. Quote, "The paint sat there on the surface of the canvas. It wasn't just the fact that she's a nude, and she's a lower class nude, but also the fact that she was painted in what many people read as almost childish or unskilled fashion." Note the contrast with our Academy Venus. Those brushstrokes virtually disappear. Okay, but is this loose brushstroke really an innovation? Or does it remind you of any of the painters we've already studied? What about Velázquez, whose paintings Manet deeply admired and indeed copied to hone his skills? Or Rembrandt? Or Delacroix? Or Turner? Is there really anything new here? And the answer is yes, but the reason is somewhat technical. Here is another observation about Monet's technique from Paul Johnson's History of Art. Manet introduced an important change. In oil painting, the practice at the time was to begin with a dark underlay and then build up lighter tones on it, using opaque layers of pigment and translucent glazes. Manet was an accomplished watercolorist, and he preferred the technique of putting on the lightest tones first and then putting in the darks. And this was a momentous change in oil painting, for it was far quicker than the old method, making outdoor work much easier. Stay tuned again for the Impressionists. And it led inevitably to a higher range of colors. It made the canvas look slightly unfinished, but also fresher and more up-to-date. Notice, too, the relatively flat rendition of Manet's Olympia, much less modeled than Titian's Venus. Manet's dark and light tonal separations, again, may reflect the influence of photography. One art critic I read noted that, quote, "In this painting and Luncheon on the Grass, light shines forward from the viewer's position." Lighting professionals sometimes refer to frontal lighting as flat lighting because of its peculiar effects. Shade concentrates at the edges of forms, light areas bleach out, surface textures and detail are suppressed, backgrounds grow dim or black. Since we look at photographs more often than we look at paintings, we're used to frontal lighting. But it's one more reason why Monet's works would have startled the 19th century French public. I came across this late 19th century photo of a Xhosa woman from what is now South Africa when I was Googling Manet and Olympia and photography. The photography blogger noted the resemblance to Olympia and also that, I quote, "commercial photographers in the colonies sold their images to eager audiences in the home country, often as postcards. But this photographer goes on to observe that there's not a hint of submissiveness or inferiority about her, even if, as seems quite likely, a photographer familiar with Manet's work had put her in that pose. Anyway, the sheen on the African woman's face makes the frontal lighting quite obvious." The flatness of Olympia may also reflect Manet's interest in Japanese woodblock prints, which were coming into fashion at the time and also tended to flatten pictorial perspective. The painting on the left is Manet's portrait of the realist novelist Émile Zola. In Zola's studio, we see a woodblock print, a sketch for Olympia, and a sketch of Velázquez's Bacchus tacked to the back wall. Did you remember that woodblock prints of the so-called floating world also captured the lives of elegant courtesans? Oh, that was way back before Christmas. Anyway, we will return to Japanese woodblock prints when we talk about the Impressionists. Interestingly, Olympia did make the cut for the Salon of 1865, where the painting was met by outrage. The Salon organizers, in fact, decided to rehang it in a higher position because they were afraid that the enraged public might vandalize the painting. And indeed, the painting was not well received. One critic at the time described Olympia as, quote, a courtesan with dirty hands and wrinkled feet with the livid tint of a cadaver displayed at the morgue. And here are a couple of lithograph caricatures published at the time. You gotta love that cat. And here's our new friend Daumier's caricature of a family viewing Monet's Olympia, although I wonder if what he's caricaturing here is the painting or maybe the bourgeois audience that was so easily shocked. Let's watch a brief clip from a video by an art critic we've encountered before touring Islamic art. He has an interesting take on why the public was so offended. What was it, and do you agree? I'll close with another famous Manet painting and another commentary on gender roles in 19th century France. Manet shows us a beautiful young barmaid arrayed with all the other items that are for sale to the prosperous men of the upper middle class. Check out the mirror behind her and the man who is ogling her. We see the male gaze again. We've come a long way from Fragonard's adulterous aristocrat on a swing, or have we?